I'm your host, Jaren Smith, and I'm here today with Professor Biebel and Andrew, how do you say your last name?
Cochrane.
Nice to be here with the both of you. How are you both doing today?
Doing well. Good to be here. Thanks, Jaren.
Yeah, pretty good. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So, kind of the topic that I wanted to speak about today was really just the idea of movies. Being in your writing fiction class, stuff like that comes to my mind often. And then really just the idea of like, in the month of November, December, holiday season, a lot of movies are coming to theaters, and really just like I feel like during this time of year, the discussion really like, oh, are you going to go see this in theaters, or like streaming services come up? So really just to get the conversation going, what was the last movie that the two of you saw in theaters?
You want to lead off?
Oh, man. It's been a long time since I've been to a movie in theaters. Probably The Post. I don't know if you remember that movie. It's a journalistic thriller about Watergate.
I think I know you're talking. Yeah, I know.
I saw The Post. Really good movie. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, it is. It was a good movie. I think it was over Thanksgiving or Christmas sometime 4 or 5 years ago. We have a daughter, so I haven't had time really to get out to the movies. It's been quite a while.
What about you?
The last one I saw was actually over the summer. My brother is a big Marvel fan, and I'm not. I'm pretty removed from the Marvel things. It's not like I dislike it, but I don't know all the ins and outs of it. And I went to see the new Thor movie with him in theaters, and I sat down and I watched it, and I thought, this is fun. I'm in a movie theater. I enjoyed this.
Yeah. For like compared to years like past, like I actually have seen a lot of movies in theaters this year, but I feel like I'm not a very harsh like movie critic. Like if like a movie has to be terrible for me to say it's bad. I think most of the movies I've seen this year were in theaters. The last movie I've seen was actually an anime movie, but it was kind of But before that, I saw the Thor movie, but like none of the movies that came out this year, for me, in my opinion, like they were just like bad. It's just like I feel like a lot of movies were super hyped up, and I went in with super high expectations, and then like because they didn't live up to the super high expectations, they kind of let me down a little bit.
Yeah.
That's fair. And I feel like the excitement, like getting back into an actual theater, has to do with those high expectations.
Exactly, and then like kind of like earlier this year, like here's gonna be my hot take. A movie that almost a lot of people love that I did not love was the Batman movie that came out in March. Just because like everyone's saying like this was the best Batman movie ever made and stuff like that, and like I went in with the mentality to not compare it to Christian Bale's Batman movies, and like I didn't find myself doing that. It's just really like I feel like there were things in the movie that's like, oh, Batman was, say, shot, for example. He's on the ground bleeding out. Then, like, seconds later, he's in the Batmobile. And it's like, you were just shot, bleeding to death. How are you back up on your... Like, I understand Batman's stronger than your average person, but, like, you were just bleeding to death. But kind of going back a little bit, like, you mentioned, like, it's been a while since you've seen a movie in theaters.
Yeah.
Does the pandemic have a role to play with that?
Sure, of course. There was a time when nobody's going out, kind of get used to not going. All the entertainment you can ask for, more than you could ever watch in 10 lifetimes, is available through various streaming services. I also think there's a difference. I mean, I miss the theater, the movie theater experience, but usually, I've been lucky enough to live by several like single screen independent theaters in sort of old buildings, and that's a very different experience than the multiplex, right? These different movies, different atmosphere. So I certainly miss that. Most of my like vivid memories of film is sort of those kinds of locations, right? Which is different. I mean, the multiplexes tend to have a pretty consistent offering, right?
Absolutely.
So and a lot of that stuff then becomes available on a streaming service, and so what you pay for is the ability to see it first, right? With other people, which there's something to that, I think. But
yeah.
Do you have any thoughts to kind of add to this question?
I think that's totally fair. I've never been to one of those like smaller, more independent places, but I would certainly love to go. I think that the experience would probably be pretty different because when you go see, you go to an AMC and you see something in IMAX, with 100 other people in the room. I feel like you're talking about those expectations, right? You expect a big, loud experience, like a big old sensory experience, right? You get everything with it.
I'm happy you mentioned that, because that kind of leads me into like the next question is really like, are there certain movies that like the two of you are interested in, and it's like, oh man, like they're making like this movie and like you've got to go see it on the big screen? Or is it kind of like you can still wait till it would come out in like a streaming service or DVD?
I can wait, right? But that's because that's mostly a function of kind of the things that I like. I think probably I remember like wanting to see The Lord of the Rings in theaters, right? Tipping how old I am, right? Films like that, where there's a certain quality to them that you just sort of want to see it with people in a group.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like the function that it serves. It almost, for me, I remember going to a lot of movies that I didn't particularly enjoy but had good memories of because I went with people I knew, right? I lived in this kind of town where that was like there were 4 things to do, and one of them was go to a movie, right? So that experience I think was valuable and worthwhile.
Yeah, I think that there's totally something to that. It's almost like a like live sports, it's very different watching it at home on TV versus going there and seeing it in person. It's like a communal experience like you're talking about.
Yeah.
A movie that I would probably never watch on a streaming service, not out of some like elitism, but out of like interest purely, but might have wanted to see in theaters, was the new Top Gun movie. I feel like that's something that like the experience of it is so unique in a theater because it's been 30 years since the last
30.
Top Gun movie, so people will be back, people will be excited to continue it. And again, it's what I was mentioning earlier, big, loud movie, sensory experience with so many other people.
Yeah, and I feel like if anything, I think the Force Awakens Star Wars movie came out in like 2015. I feel like that probably had a very similar effect on a lot of people because like, me and you, in general, a lot of Augustana students were not alive when the original trilogy came out. So like so I can speak for example, like my dad, like he saw them around the time those movies came out, and then like when they had the prequels with like young Anakin, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then when they made like the Disney trilogy, like I know like before like those movies, like he was excited. So like I just know really all of my family are nerds, myself included. So like me, like I'm super into like Marvel, like anime. So like I know for me, it depends the movie on if I can wait or not. And so like, for example, like one of my favorite Marvel movies is the Black Panther. And so like the new one comes out the end of this week. And I know when I can get my hands on some tickets, I definitely plan to. And it's not super often where it's like, oh, when a movie releases, I feel like I have to see it right away. But there are a lot of movies I feel like I can wait. Now with some of those movies I've seen earlier this year, do I wish I would have waited? Yes.
Yeah, there's always that.
But in general, like I do think like going to the movies, depending on like the movie you're seeing, the experience you get out of it is like way more intense than like watching on streaming service. Like even though I've never seen like this, I'd imagine with how loud those movies probably are, like hearing like the planes take off or certain lines of dialogue, like even though this is like it literally hits quite different than like watching it at home, because like even though like you'll still feel that excitement at home, it's like in the movie theater it's like you're almost probably at an airport.
Yeah, and usually I think that's right, that most of the value of the theater is often the big sensory things that you said. There's some directors, I think my dad and I went to see the Tarantino movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, so that's probably the last movie I saw in theaters, because that's 2019. Certain directors get that cachet, right? Like other than the Marvel movies or the big effects movies, I'm thinking of Paul Thomas Anderson, that Licorice Pizza movie. That was kind of a thing. People wanted to go see in theaters.
I remember that.
Tarantino, maybe a few others where certain, but that takes a lot, right? Like it takes a lot to get to that level where you're such an item or a cultural icon that people want to go see your movie first. So there's probably still some room for movies that aren't big and loud in the theater. But it has to it takes a while. It takes kind of a special director to cut through the clutter.
Absolutely. One of the last movie that I actually saw with my dad before everything closed down with COVID was Ford versus Ferrari.
That's a good movie. Yeah.
Like seeing it in theaters was like such a cool experience with my dad. It's a really special memory because obviously that was like the last thing that we could do before everything shut down. So that was one of those things, like there's absolutely space for like less big and loud movies in a theater, but that was a big and loud movie that I have a really good memory of.
Yeah. Kind of like speaking also kind of like before like the COVID, the last movie that I had saw was with my older brother because like before COVID, like I had never seen an anime movie in theaters, and he is the reason why I'm such a big anime fan. Then at that time, My Hero released their second movie, and because usually anime movies, they're not in theaters for very long. Like if they're super, super popular, like they'll be in theaters longer, but typically they might be in theaters for like a week or two. And I think this was like one of the last days that movie was in theaters, and like we saw it at like there was only us and like another person in the theater. So like I feel like with movies in general, when there's not very many people in the theater, I feel like people are more their authentic selves instead of like being quiet and watch. Because like I just remember like normally when I see a movie in theaters, like I'm usually gonna be quiet or like whisper to whoever I'm with to see the movie, and like me and my brother and the other person who was there, we were just talking like normal and like getting excited, all being kind of like nerds and like screaming at the screens. All that was a pretty good memory. Then like I just remember as like movies kind of started opening. I don't remember the first movie I saw in theaters after it started opening back up, but I feel like if anything, since my family like loves movies, I feel like often when they get the chance they'll go, especially since they all love movie theater popcorn. I love popcorn. It's just that like they'll eat the whole like large popcorn before the movie starts.
Yeah.
And it's like, holy cow, like Lord.
You got to get your money's worth. That's like $16 of popcorn.
That is true. And then like kind of speaking of that, because like kind of playing both sides, like I understand why people like love streaming services, because like you get yourself some popcorn, you get yourself like, you know, a drink, say some candy on top of the ticket. And let's just say even just for yourself, that's already spending $30 at least.
Oh, yeah.
In which, like, if you watch, depending on the movie you watch at home, it might only be a couple of dollars. Unless you're watching, like, a Disney Plus movie. Because, like, I'd imagine when the Black Panther comes out, if you want to watch it on, like, Disney Plus, it's going to cost, like, what you would pay to see a movie in theaters. But any kind of thoughts about that?
Yes. I think that the way that streaming services are changing is making it less accessible for sure. The way that, you know, when it started, Netflix was the hub, right? It was every movie that, you know, was on a streaming service was on Netflix. Every show was the same way. And things have kind of fragmented out in a way that makes it's so much more difficult, because now you're paying, if you want all of the accessibility, you know, Netflix, Hulu, HBO, what's the one that you just mentioned? Disney Plus.
Yeah.
You're going to be paying, what, $50 a month for all of them. And it's like, you know, it's just becoming less accessible, I think.
Yeah. And kind of speaking on, like, the idea of streaming services, like, how many streaming services would you say maybe, like, people in your family, like, have that you also have access to that, like, but you don't use them regularly? So, like, for me, example, I'd say, like, between, like, my mom and dad, and so, like, almost any streaming services you can think of, my family has it. But like me specifically, I'll only really I don't watch a lot of Netflix. Like I've been trying to get more into it. Like Hulu is kind of like if anything, Hulu, even though Crunchyroll is a thing, I feel like for me, Hulu was a little bit more accessible for me. Sure. Amazon more lately, just because like I'm a huge football fan, and like Thursday Night Football is on Amazon. I'd say those are probably the main three and then like, if anything, when I'm feeling like childhood movies I'll go to Disney, because like, I feel like whenever like I want to think of a movie from my childhood, it's probably already on Disney Plus.
Sure.
And like I had a conversation with one of my friends the other day. They were watching the movie like Sky High. I couldn't tell you when it came out, but it's essentially, like, to describe it, if you're not familiar with it, I can't remember the main two characters' names, but like a bunch of students are going to like this famous like superhero high school, and then like one of the main character, he doesn't really have a superpower, and like his dad is a super famous superhero. And then like by the end of the movie, I think if I remember correctly, he has like a combination of his parents' powers. And so like it's been like forever since I've seen that movie, and like I was literally like, I don't remember what I was doing. I was talking with my friend about it, but I was ready to just stop what I was doing and watch that movie, just because like I feel that's the biggest benefit for me for Disney Plus. Just like, yes, they have a lot of great new material, but like a lot of the old things that they have, that's what I go back to, and I find myself loving each time.
It's interesting to me, Jen, because you sought out that experience, right? You know, again, I'm the old person on the podcast, so that's an experience that I only found surfing through channels, right? Like, oh, I saw this movie, right? But somebody else is choosing that for you. I mean, I think that's interesting, right? Going to a theater, yeah, you get to pick the movie you watch, but a whole system has given you a limited set of options, right? Like the studios are choosing what you can choose, and the streaming services breaks that completely, right? Now, the algorithms are sort of choosing for you on some level, right?
Yeah.
But there's just so much more content that you have a lot more freedom and choice in terms of what you want to pursue, and you know that's good. There's also something to letting other people choose, I think, or being able to experience something that maybe you wouldn't have chosen, or you know, I think so that it's always things. When things change, there's always something is lost and something is gained. I think that's an interesting way to look at it.
And like I also kind of think like another thing with like streaming services is like with like friends over the years, like I've seen movies that like, let's just say my 16-year-old self would have completely disliked. But me as I am today, like watch them as like, this is actually kind of interesting. And then like it kind of goes in that conversation, like if you can speak with your younger self, like what would your younger self think? Your younger self would be like, you're watching like romantic movies? Like how dare you? Because I remember, I don't remember the name of the movie, but like some of my friends when I was in high school, I think it was sophomore, junior year, there's a movie they really wanted me to watch. And like I told them, I'm like, I'm sorry, like romantic movies are not my interest. Like I'm going to need something to keep me awake. And I don't mean any disrespect toward people who like romantic movies. And like, they all know me. They know I love food. So like they tried getting the food there early so like I'd be eating and stay invested. Unfortunately, it was not there early. So I did fall, but I did wake up at kind of the one scene that everyone remembers and stuff like that. So I watched like the last half hour of the movie. And then like I might go back and ask that friend like, hey, what was the name of that movie? Yeah. And then like if I try to watch it today to see if I, you know, can do what I couldn't do 5 years ago and stay awake through it, I think that'd be pretty impressive, at least for me. But another thing is like kind of with like some of the things streaming services do that movies don't. What would you say that like, at least in the benefits of streaming services, like they'd have to do something completely wrong for you to like, okay, maybe streaming services is not the best option anymore. Maybe I can make more time to go see movies. What would they have to do to ruin streaming services for you?
I don't know. I think the more fractured that it gets, right? I don't. It'd be hard to sort of be like, I'm not going to have any streaming services ever, right? But I think the more fractured that it gets, the more difficult it is to have conversations with people who've seen the same stuff as you, right? And so that I think becomes difficult, right? That's the risk, is that everybody's watching 10 different things at once. And so you can't, when I teach screenwriting, it's very, very hard to pick like, what streaming service am I going to require people to sign up for, right? Because it used to be Netflix was just like, oh, let's just do that, right? Everybody presumably has it, or a lot of people have it already. They have a wide selection, and so now it's just very difficult to choose. So I think that's it. You're just getting too fractured. Limiting availability. I don't know.
I would totally agree with that. It's becoming more and more like cable TV, where you get like these packages, right? Like there's the Disney package with like Hulu, ESPN, and Disney, and it becomes more and more difficult to like justify, I think, having every single one, because you're talking about like which ones do you use the most, the least, and when you look at the ones that you use the least, you know, it's the fear of missing out that something will be released and you're like, I wish I still had that. So then you fork over the, $10?
Might be more now. I don't know.
Well, they're all increasing, and there's discussion of like ads being implemented in like Netflix.
Sure.
And I think that's something that would be, especially in like movie experiences, I think that would be really difficult for me to justify. I feel like it breaks it up and like takes you out of it too much.
Oh yeah, ads are a nightmare.
Oh yeah.
Are you too familiar with Bros, the Billy Eichner?
Yes.
Which was in theaters and didn't do particularly well.
No.
And so they sold the rights to streaming, right? And so now you can stream it. So it becomes a way to supplement income, but that's a kind of movie that is going to get a more fractured, smaller audience on streaming,
Yes.
right? And so, I mean, this is the difference we're talking about, where a movie like that belongs in a theater, right? And probably gets pushed out by all kinds of factors, both cultural and economic. And so the streaming services are nice because they give a film, and there's all kinds of stories like that. They give a film like that a platform. They'll give a lot of indie films a platform, but you're competing for a smaller audience, and you start, maybe it forms a bubble, or it just doesn't get this sort of crossover that was possible before.
Yeah, and kind of like speaking on that, something that we discussed in one of my classes, because like I knew this movie was only on Netflix. I never knew it was actually in theaters. It's Gray Man, the Ryan Gosling movie. I think it came out, I want to say we'll say summer, late summer, maybe early school year. I remember I watched it with like my mom's like before coming to school, and like I loved the movie. I thought it was great, but I remember like I probably saw the Thor movie after seeing that, and I saw the movie poster. I'm like, oh, I didn't know this was in theaters. And then like in my classes when I found out that like the Gray Man performed like from the budget that they had to make the movie versus what they earned, the movie did horrible. And like I genuinely had no idea it was even in theaters. And like I feel like even as me as like we'll say a semi-regular moviegoer, like there's still that disconnect for me. And then like a movie like Bros, for example, because like I knew about them, but like I wouldn't see ads for it often. And so like I feel like certain movies are going to get the more attention. And something we kind of questioned in class was, I think the movie kind of came out around Halloween time. It came out in the month of October. And so like I feel like if it came out at a different time, it might have been more helpful for that specific movie.
Sure. And the same discussion was happening with that. There was the Sony like vampire superhero movie, Morbius.
Yeah, that came out in January.
Yeah, that came out, and like it was a really bad time for it to come out because there were just better movies in theaters at the time. And then
January's like Oscar month. Yeah.
And then it got pulled from theaters early because it just was not performing well. And then people kept making jokes about it online.
And
Sony thought that meant, oh, this movie's popular and people want to see it, so they put it back in theaters. And people still didn't see it.
Yeah. And like with some of the memes about it, Jared Leto, like he made it seem official. Like he posted a picture of like essentially him reading a script. It was like Morbius 2, it's Morbin time, like playing into it.
Yeah. Oh man.
And so then like, yeah, I think if that movie were to come out in October, I think the movie could have done better because
possibly.
I was gonna say like one of the things I think of, at least it feels like a Halloween movie, at least in terms of like for what I feel like the movie tried to do. And also when I think of Halloween, one thing I think of is vampires, which is an important plot point in the movie Morbius.
Sure.
With really slowly kind of starting to wrap up, just really one thing that I was thinking of is, what do you think about like let's say referring to Augustana, like I only know of 2 movie theaters around in this area. Do you think that plays into the fact that say like college students here might prefer streaming services over going to the movies?
Yeah, I mean, there's not. You're in a multiplex town, right? Right. Yeah. So you have a menu and it requires a car and all of that sort of stuff. So I think there's just some barriers. There's usually all kinds of movies on campus, right? But that's a different kind of experience. So I'm sure that stuff plays into it. I actually used to like going to movies by myself. I don't know if anybody else does. But one thing that's lost is that experience of like would you go to a movie? You go to watch the movie,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and something about having to be in another place is nice for that, right? Like, it's a lot harder to check my phone during a
Yes.
movie than when I'm at home watching it on TV, even if there's nobody else in the theater. And so I think, that's something that is hard to replicate on streaming services, that sense of like, we're going to all go and watch a story and like, we're going to focus on the story.
Yeah.
As opposed to kind of being distracted. And that's hard. Like, it's hard to give up the distraction of like being able to check my phone and watch the movie. Right. So I think that might be a underrated barrier. I think that's hard to do.
Yeah. I would totally agree with that. I think that the accessibility to it, right, for college students is certainly limited. The range of people who have cars, who have access to the transportation needed to get there, and then the money that you would need to spend on it too. Not everyone has the money to, blow $50 on like 3 hours of entertainment.
Yeah, that's true. And then like kind of thinking about the accessibility, like it would have been before spring break last semester. My roommate, I've had like freshman year, sophomore year, and this year, I'd say the number one thing that we've both bonded over has been anime. And so like I just remember he got a couple of friends and Jujutsu Kaisen came out, an anime movie around then, and he was really excited, and like it was an anime I like too, so like I went to go see it with. But the friends that, kind of went, I was the only one with a car. Mm-hmm. So the only way that we could all go was which I didn't have a problem with it. And what they kind of did to, I guess, sucker me into it is that one of them bought my ticket. Mm-hmm. So
nice.
Like and I know at nighttime for some theaters, like the ticket's going to cost more for, say, an adult.
Sure.
So like I was like, yeah, I'll drive.
Yeah.
But with your idea of like going to see movies alone, if I have to, I will go see the Black Panther movie by myself.
Yeah.
Like that is like I've never been in a movie theater like 100% by myself, like without say like my brother, family members, or friends with me.
Yeah.
But if I have to, that will be the first. Like I've never been like against that, and then like I feel like there are times like there have been times where I've kind of like early in the pandemic with like being in school, like or I've been like so bored, I was like I could go see a movie right now.
Yeah.
But then I was like, wait, my freshman year, I didn't have a car on campus. I was like,
sure.
I kind of can't. But is there any other kind of closing thoughts that the two of you would like to say kind of about the grand scheme of like movie theaters versus streaming service?
I think that I'll always be pro movie theater. I think that no matter where the world goes, I think that I'll have a certain love for it just because childhood experiences and the friends and family that, we've bonded over these things. It's an important thing to me, and I'll always be in defense of movie theaters for sure. I will pay the $50 for the popcorn and like, the Coke machines that have like 700 flavors in them, those things. That's where it's at.
Yeah, I'll second that. And I guess it may be part of what I said earlier, where I think of movies as being a communal experience. But I have been in movie theaters by myself. Just me and the projectionist, who probably isn't even a real person anymore. But I still think there's something about that place, right? As a place where people go to focus entirely on a story, as a piece of art. And I think there's something very valuable about that.
Yeah, I agree with the both of you 100%. And like even with like how I was saying earlier that there are some movies I wish I didn't see in theaters, I don't regret seeing those movies in theaters because I feel like even if some of those movies I really, really did enjoy, I feel like the best experience for a lot of movies is on the big screen. But just really in general, thank you both for your time. I greatly appreciate it. And I feel like we've had a really good discussion. And I was happy that this was able to be very kind of like informal, conversational. So thank you both for your time and hope you have a great rest of your day. And for our listeners out there, be sure to tune in to the next episode of the Augustana Observer Podcast. I'm Jaren Smith, and we are out.